Bigfoot saved me from Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story for you about me being attacked by a dogman well over 6 feet tall, pursuing me to exhaustion, and then moving in for the kill. But with my story, that was only the beginning. As the title has already informed you, out of nowhere, a Sasquatch far taller than the dogman entered the situation and gave me my best chance for escape. But for me to tell you all of that, I have to start off by telling you about my local supermarket. Bear with me, this won't take long, and you'll see why it's necessary to hear this part before you understand why this all happened. I don't know what it's like where you live, but here in upstate New York, our former governor, when he wasn't harassing the women who worked for him, managed to pass a law forcing us working-class individuals to pay for inferior bags when we shop at the supermarket, when we used to get superior ones free. One corrupt dictatorial decision by an abusive tyrant leads to any number of different unexpected results. In my case, the governor's decision led to me almost being eaten alive by the dogman. Allow me to explain. I'm not Felix Unger, so like most of you, I usually forget to bring a bag with me to the supermarket. This particular time, I was picking up steaks, and so it was a most egregious error, one that very well could have proven fatal. The clerk charged me a nickel for a bag made of tissue-thin material, unfit to carry anything heavier than downy feathers inside of. This same supermarket used to double paper bag your groceries in bags almost as thick as cardboard, then stick that inside a plastic bag to make it easier for you to carry. Now they charge you money for tissue bags too thin to even serve the function of being a bag. I delicately picked up my groceries and walked unwittingly out into danger on that overcast day. I had to use both arms to carry my tissue paper shopping bag in front of me because it was so thin and fragile. The shortest way to walk home from the supermarket is through the woods, and it's usually a nice trip that I enjoy. But that day was one of those days when it felt like it was gonna start raining any second all day long. The wind was blowing and it was getting colder out as the day wore on instead of warmer. It was so dark out that it might as well have been night instead of day. I began to feel cold and wet and noticed that my so-called bag was leaking blood. Looking inside, sure enough, the plastic wrapping around the steaks had torn, and the paper bag had already largely dissolved as it had gotten wet. My chest and belly were covered in steak juice, and I smelled like a slaughterhouse. I pulled the wet bits of dissolved paper off the meat packaging, and I had no choice but to carry the steaks in my arms and allow them to bleed all over me as I walked. I hoped none of my neighbors would see me in this situation. At the time, I thought that would be a bad thing to have happen. You know what's a lot worse than having your neighbors see you in an embarrassing situation? Dogman smelling you when you're covered in meat juice and still have another 10 minutes to walk through the forest before you can get home. Now, I'm not gonna tell you exactly where this happened because I still live there. But let's say it's not that far off from Whitehall, New York. We have a law up here that you're not allowed to kill or harm Bigfoot in any way. I'm not kidding. Bigfoot is officially recognized as a member of the community, and he is thought of as a human up here basically. It fuels what tourism we have in the region. But me personally, I didn't believe in Bigfoot. When I would meet tourists, I'd tell them Bigfoot was real out of loyalty to the Whitehall region, but I never saw one. Nobody I knew had ever told me about seeing one, and I didn't think they were really a thing. As far as Dogman goes, I had never even heard of the Dogman. I had never heard one single person in my life ever assert the possibility that werewolves were real. I've read up on all of this since my experience, but to say I was a cryptid virgin on that dark, overcast day would be a quite accurate assessment. I kept thinking as I was walking that I was hearing a strange sound. I wasn't sure if I was creating it myself or what, but it sounded like some kind of a growling. A low, guttural growling. My first thought was that it was a car or motorcycle engine off in the distance, but the longer it went on, the more it sounded to me like an animal noise, not a mechanical engine. I had no fear in my heart in that moment because I was unaware of the possibility that there might be any predators in that forest that might be dangerous to humans. I was so wrapped up in how unwrapped my steaks were and how I was going to have to do laundry and take a shower when I got home that I never considered that I might be entering into real danger. I never grasped that my life might be about to be menaced, and maybe worse. It became increasingly clear that the sound was not coming from me, and that it was coming from the woods to my right. Not any one spot in the woods, mind you, the sound moved as I did. So, something was growling and moving along with me, and I couldn't see what it was through the leaves. I asked myself what would growl like that in upstate New York, and before my mind could come up with any answers, the individual creating the sound appeared. He walked through the foliage into the clearing alongside the path, like an actor walking through curtains onto a stage, making a very deliberate kind of an entrance. At first he stood at his full height, which was something intimidating and impressive. I can't say how tall, but far more than me. If I'm 5'11", then possibly this figure was 6.5 feet tall. He was very much taller than I was. After making his point about his height, the creature bent down into an almost crouched position, deliberately lowering its head down below my eye line and glaring up at me as though he were considering pouncing on me. I looked down into the glowing eyes of this giant, crouching figure, seemingly as at ease on 2 legs, 3, or 4, and I wanted to run, but I knew that I wouldn't get very far. The long-snouted face of the beast was baring its fangs at me, and it was through those clenched teeth that the growling sound had been emanating. Its tall, hairy, dog-like ears were held back at the top of its head, which seemed to be an indicator of extreme agitation. I did my best to avoid eye contact, but believe me, my attention never left that beast. I had an opportunity during this standoff to look the creature over, and nothing I saw made any sense to me at that time. The hind legs, the ones I saw him walk bipedally out of the woods on, were like the hind legs of a dog or wolf or coyote, but the front legs, those were more like extra long arms, ending in sharp hand-like claws. I had little doubt he could run as well on 4 limbs or 2. The creatures seemed to have been designed with more athleticism even than chimpanzees. And if a chimp can literally tear a man apart, just imagine what this canine version of a giant chimp would be able to do. On top of the sheer strength, speed, and unpredictable fury of any of the greater apes, this fanged and clawed predator had probably 4 or 5 times the sheer slicing power of something like a gorilla. Although apes can use their superhuman strength to defend themselves fiercely, this wolf-like creature that looked ready to leap upon me seemed designed specifically to end you quickly, to get to lapping up your blood with the least amount of hassle. I noticed that in between growling and snarling, the creature had been sniffing the air as well. The meat! The meat! He was trailing me because I smelled like a butchered cow. I took one of the leaking, plastic-covered supermarket steaks and tossed it in the general direction of the hairy man-like dog. Unexpectedly, he took it as an insult, not reacting to the meat as food like I had hoped. He advanced a few steps toward me, growling louder and nastier than before, holding his head even lower to the ground as he maneuvered toward me. I tried to remove the plastic from my one remaining steak, and it was then that I realized how scared I was. My hands were shaking so violently that it was hard to tear the plastic off. Knowing how scared my body was, my brain lost faith and got scared too, if that makes any sense. I was really worried, to say the least. Somehow, I managed to toss the unwrapped plastic steak in the direction of the Dogman without offending or frightening him this time, and he began to lick and chew the meat before him. That was my cue to leave, and I just turned around and walked. I was not at the point yet of caring where I was walking to other than away from the creature. I'm going to go ahead and call him the Dogman, but I tried to avoid doing that up till now, because that was not a concept in my head when this happened. When I tell my story and others lump it in with other Dogman stories, I can't say I agree with doing that. To me, this was about me meeting this one creature who was sort of a very specific person. Just as he didn't encounter any human, I didn't encounter any Dogman. He encountered me and I encountered him, and it seemed clear to me that neither of us had ever met someone of each other's species before. I do wish it could have been under better circumstances, because if this thing weren't a man-eater, I'd have been so excited to see such a remarkable creature. Let's face it, if Dogman weren't the most dangerous and scary thing in the woods, he'd still be about the most interesting land animal you'd probably ever see. The Dogman really is like a living werewolf, and that's not something I ever expected to look at with my own eyes. I must have been in a state of shock because it took some time for me to walk through the woods before I could even remember where I wanted to go. By then I was lost and it had gotten dark. I looked up and saw the moon, then tried to remember what direction the moon was rising in. I never learned to read constellations, so I couldn't tell the way to go from the stars either. As I slowly came out of my panicked fog, I remembered my phone had GPS on it and a map app. I got into it and typed my home address. I could see the blinking light on the map indicating where I was, which was lost in the woods. What I couldn't figure out was which way I should walk in the real world in order to make that blinking red dot move closer to home. I decided to just keep walking the way I was walking and watch the map. After a while, I'd be able to figure out if I was walking north, east, south, or west, and I'd be able to course correct after that. It took me a couple of minutes to figure out that I was walking west, but I needed to walk north. I made a right, and it felt like only a few minutes went by before I heard him coming. He was crashing through the woods, clearly coming at a fast pace. I could hear him growling and snarling. I could tell it was the same creature. I quickened my pace as well, but the Dogman made a beeline for me. I still smelled like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He could still sense me from far off with his superior smelling ability. I knew I didn't have a chance, and somehow that made me run even faster. I ended up tripping and falling, but I was on the verge of collapse even before that happened. I was just outmatched. I knew I couldn't escape him, but by the time he caught up to me and cornered me, I was completely out of breath, and I knew I had at least tried my absolute best to get away. I used every ounce in the tank, as they say. I lay there, panting, holding my throbbing ankle, and the Dogman circled me, continuing to tell me in his snarling, growling language how little he thought of me. It sounded like he was listing all the bad things he was going to do with me. I just watched him from the ground and hyperventilated. There was one thing about this Dogman that would help me identify him if I saw him a second time, and that would be the big scar or gash across his face and snout. The scar looked old, but had never fully healed, and had a very singular look to it. You would never forget that scar once you saw it, and you would never confuse that Dogman with any other. In my head, I've even named him Scarface. Scarface the Dogman, the scariest and meanest individual I ever ran into. Did you know that in England it's now illegal to broadcast a show on BBC where someone with a scar is the villain? So don't expect any documentaries about the Dogman I had to deal with on that night, since he was scarred, and he was quite a villain. I'm sure most humans and animals with scars are good, but in my opinion, the Dogman is the living embodiment of evil, whether he is scarred or whether he is not. The way I ended up down on the turf was that I was running as fast as I could while looking over my shoulder behind me. It should surprise nobody that in my panicked, terrified, exhausted state, I fell on my face in the process. I think it was a root, but it could have been a rock that I tripped over, and before I even hit the ground, I already knew I had twisted my ankle. It was throbbing with a sharp and extreme pain, and I couldn't consider putting weight on it just yet. I tried to stand but fell right back down. It was going to take time before I'd be able to walk. I knew I had to run in order to survive, and yet I was unable to even stand up. Try to imagine the panic of needing to do something basic that's never been difficult to do before, as in running, and to suddenly be unable to do this when I needed to do it the most. My mind was racked trying to think up a backup plan. Foot isn't working. Can I walk out of here on my hands? Nope. I was never able to do a handstand. Am I gonna die because I never went to clown college? These were the crazy panicked thoughts flying through my brain as I became convinced that I might not survive this encounter. The snarling Dogman moved in closer, drool dripping off his tongue. Judging by his eyes, he was thinking what a good meal I would make. I could smell his hot, rotten breath, and I remember feeling like I was about to lose my life in a painting by Hieronymus Bosch. I was in a horror film with some sort of naked werewolf about to chew my face off as an appetizer. And then, as my life flashed in front of my eyes and tears streamed down my cheeks, the Dogman moved in, and I accepted that my life was about to have its last paragraph written. Suddenly, the creature jerked backward, its face looking confused and in pain. Why had it moved so abruptly and so oddly? Sitting up to get a better view, I saw that the Dogman, the impossible-to-defeat cryptid monster who had been about to devour me alive, had a giant hand around his throat. That giant hand was at the end of a long, giant, hairy arm, and when I saw that the arm was attached to a big, hairy man with extremely large feet, I realized I was in the presence of the old man of the mountain. That Dogman now had a much bigger problem than me on his hands. That Dogman now had to deal with Bigfoot. At least I presume that this was Bigfoot. He was ridiculously tall. He was covered in dark fur over his entire body other than his face, hands, and feet. It had to be Bigfoot. Its head looked like a gorilla, but its face looked like a human. Like human features and an otherwise ape-like cranium, with the pointed sagittal crest and small ears on the sides like a gorilla or chimp. The Squatch was holding that Dogman by the neck, and he started lifting the freaking creature up off the ground at the end of his extended arm. Imagine how tall the Bigfoot had to have been to be able to lift up a 6.5-foot tall, hairy Dogman. That Bigfoot seemed to be as much taller than the Dogman was taller than me, if that makes any sense. The Dogman's arms and legs were flailing in the air, but he was unable to break the choking grip around his throat as he got lifted higher and higher off the dirt, missing several times as the clawed feet of the Dogman attempted to tear away at the Bigfoot's chest. The canine then swung himself up and scratched at the Squatch's arm, having much more success making painful contact. The Bigfoot screamed and let go of the wolfman, who landed on his feet and immediately flung himself in a frenzy at his much larger opponent. Although the Bigfoot landed thudding blows, the Dogman tore the Bigfoot a million tiny cuts, and it looked as though my tormentor might be turning the tide and overtaking the Bigfoot. When the Sasquatch uprooted an entire tree and wound up like Babe Ruth to knock the Dogman out of the park with it, I realized I'd better get myself out of there. I forced myself into a limping type of escape, holding onto trees and slowly, steadily 1 foot hopping myself northward. I could hear the battle continuing behind me, and it sounded as though the Bigfoot was winning. Loudly. When I eventually got home, I had to cancel my plans for the evening, which was a wrong move at that stage of my relationship. So you might say Dogman cost me a girlfriend. I won't make light of that breakup, but I will say I'd rather lose a lover than my life. So rather than mope over what the Dogman cost me, I'd rather be thankful that Bigfoot was there and think about what he saved me, which was life itself. After all, I wouldn't even be telling you this story if it weren't true that Bigfoot saved me from Dogman. We hope you enjoyed that all-new story. Now here's a scene from our next episode. My wife and I debated who we needed to call. We could see the 2 Dogmen inside the garage, and who knew what else was in there. The guy I left in charge of the house while we were gone didn't drive, and never had reason to even look inside the garage. Maybe it's for the best. I hate to think of what the creatures might have done to him if they heard him coming and pulled an ambush. Dogman hibernated and interbred in my garage. That's tomorrow, Wednesday, right here on the Dogman Show. See you then. Our executive producer is this smart guy, Daniel. He knows lots of stuff, like he read the manual. Cooler than Velvet Underground and Nico, our executive producer named Daniel D'Amico. Please join us in thanking Daniel D'Amico for making this episode possible. In exchange for his kindness, Daniel gets to see our weekly secret uncensored episodes on Sunday, our secret previews on Wednesdays, and our 21 hours of archived secret uncensored stories far too wild to tell on this channel. And you can see all that too. Just join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com or click that join link under this or any of our videos to become a Scary Stories channel member. And now here's TV spokesdog Henry Lee Dogman to fill in the deets. Hank? Thanks for watching till the end. If you liked what you saw, please consider clicking like on the video or sharing it with your friends and family that you think might also be interested. If you would like to see more of our work, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon next to the subscribe button so that YouTube will alert you when we put out a new video. To become a channel member and gain access to our special perks, you can click that join link under each of our videos. Another option is to join our PayPal subscribers club at peterbernard.com. You can join for as little as 99 cents on YouTube or $1.50 at peterbernard.com, and that gains you access to our weekly secret uncensored episodes. If you'd like to see our 21 hours of archives of uncensored Dogman stories, then please join at the $3 level or above. To get to watch our shows in advance of the public, please join at our $10 level. That gets you all the perks. If you join our channel memberships, you need to check our community page here on YouTube in order to get the links to the secret videos and other perks. If you're in the PayPal subscribers club, Peter will email you all the news and links himself. Once joining the PayPal club, which is Peter's homemade club, please give him a chance to see that you've joined and to compose you a personal welcome email, as none of that is automated. But whichever you join, we'll name you an executive producer for the next available episode. Do you have a scary experience that you'd like to share with us? You can email us at scarystoriesnyc@gmail.com or call our Scary Stories voicemail hotline at 804-LA-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. It's a Google voicemail box, so that means it keeps cutting off after every 3 minutes. If your story is longer than that, please keep calling back and we can piece it together on our end. Good night, and have a scary tomorrow.
Come back for more scary stories.